lunch. If you do doze off during this panel, please try not to snore too loudly. I've been told that we have to limit the panel to about 40 minutes because everything's running late, unfortunately, so hopefully we'll be able to catch up now. Thank you for joining. This panel is about blockchain, and we set out when we were getting this panel together to think about how we could approach this, sticking strictly to gambling, because you go to so many conferences where you have a blockchain panel and they just go off at a tangent speaking only about crypto and volatility and blockchain. And we really would like here to try and focus a bit more well, we can't really do it in depth, I guess, because of the time limitation, but we still, in the little time we have, would like to focus purely on gambling. The topic is probably a little bit inseparable from crypto as such, because of crypto being used as a means of payment, potentially also for gambling transactions. But we'll try and balance it out, and hopefully we'll do so nicely by talking about, well, our panelists will talk about how blockchain, or what the merits or faults are with blockchain technology when looked at from the sort of fairness, game fairness aspect, transparency, how a regulator can audit a blockchain protocol, and how you can make arrangements for regulator to have proper regulatory reporting, what the issues are with GDPR and blockchain, etc. I just wanted to start, before I introduce the panelists, by just saying one thing. Of course, I'm not a techie, and I think most of us in this room aren't techies, but in order to sort of understand really what we're talking about, I think it's helpful if I just describe to you how I understand exactly what blockchain is. And of course, the panelists can tell me I'm completely wrong about it, but I think of blockchain as a sort of data structure, yes? Which contains records that are linked using cryptography, and you can add further bits of data to the structure if a number of parties, of unrelated parties, reach a consensus, and that consensus is normally based on pre-agreed rules which are inbuilt in the coding itself. So those rules can be simple. For instance, they can provide for the passing of a digital unit of value, or they can be complex. They can provide, for instance, for a game to be played between several persons. They can provide for random results of a game to be generated. They could provide for third-party developers to be allowed to develop new games on that platform based on a set of conditions inbuilt in that platform. So that's how I think about it. And now, with no further ado, I want to introduce our distinguished panelists. So thank you all for accepting to be on this panel. We have Ana Maria Baciu, who is a partner with Nestor in Romania, and Ana Maria has been for the past 19 years or so practicing international and Romanian business law, and she heads the intellectual property, pharmaceuticals and healthcare practices of her firm, and co-heads, together with Cosmina Simion, who's also here, the gaming and consumer protection practice. She's been involved in reviewing the Romanian gaming legislation, and she is a general member of IMGL. Kok Heng Lau, my far right, is a partner with Rajan Tan in that firm's Singapore office. He's practiced law since 1990, and his main areas of focus are intellectual property, gaming, sports, media, entertainment law, contentious and non-contentious. Kok Heng's gaming practice is arguably the most extensive gambling law practice in Singapore, and he's also a general member of IMGL. Gil White, beside Kok Heng, is a partner with HFN, Herzog Fox and Niemann in Israel. Gil is a first port of call for a lot of Israeli clients who are doing business internationally. And he focuses on regulated industries, gambling being one of them. He heads HFN's e-commerce department, and for probably well over a decade, he has advised some of the world's leading internet gaming and fintech companies from Israel. Also, and very relevant to this panel, he has led the development of HFN's blockchain technology practice. Andreas Glaner is a partner with MME in Switzerland, and he focuses on technology, industrial, and digital sectors. He's active in contentious and non-contentious matters, and again, most notably for this panel, he has extensive expertise in fintech and blockchain technology, and he is the person who has driven and now heads MME's blockchain practice group, which, and we know through working very closely with Andreas over a period of years, is considered by many to be the leading blockchain practice on continental Europe. Beside me, my partner, Joe Borg, who's with our firm, WH Partners in Malta. Joe used to be the chief regulatory officer at the Malta Gaming Authority for many years, and also a member, an elected member of the Board of Trustees of the International Association of Gaming Regulators. Most of you know Joe, and I don't need to tell you that he's been key to the development and growth of our gaming practice, but also that in 2015 he set up our blockchain advisory practice and now heads a fully fledged team that focus on blockchain. And Joe is also a member of IMGL. Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, let's see how we're going to go about this and get started. I won't ask questions individually, as you know, but I will ask questions, and all of you please feel free to comment. And just to start off, I'd like to hear from you whether you consider that when we talk about blockchain, you think we should be focused only on the online gambling world, or should we also be looking at land-based bricks and mortar gambling and applications that it could have for that?
Well, with technology convergence that's happening in the gaming industry, I'm assuming that there will be some potential use cases for blockchain in certain processes within land-based gaming as well. But I think we're still a bit far away from achieving that. I think even the technology convergence is a bit slower in certain jurisdictions than in others, especially because of regulatory constraints in most cases, and also because many incumbents are afraid of moving out of their comfort zone sometimes. But I believe that once technological convergence becomes more accentuated, I believe that eventually, yes, blockchain could play an important role in land-based as well.
Anybody else want to pitch in on that one? Because from what you said, Joe, you'd almost think that blockchain is already widely adopted in the online gambling world. And I mean, we know that it's not really the case, is it? So does anyone want to comment on that?
I think the challenge of blockchain technology, and when I sit and talk to some of the techies, they sort of take us back 20 years and say that when people developed the TCP/IP internet protocol, it was the same. I think that the theory behind blockchain technology and having decentralized databases where you don't have an owner of the data, but the data is spread amongst all of the various members of the blockchain, I think is interesting and exciting. I think that the development of that technology over the next 2 or 3 years, which I think will be quick, will show us the various uses that it has, because at the end of the day, as traditional gaming tries to adopt technology, still fails in many cases, but tries to adopt technology, if blockchain becomes an accepted technological platform, traditional gaming will have no choice as well. But the question is how quickly the technology develops and how quickly, whilst we don't want to talk about crypto, but you know, the tie between cryptocurrency and blockchain is so tight that we're going to have to see the adoption of crypto in the traditional gaming world, and that's probably still some years away.
But you do have quite a lot of crypto casinos out there, don't you? All the ones I can think of are based in Curacao. And perhaps there's others based in other places, but certainly not in any tier 1 regulated jurisdictions, probably nowhere on continental Europe, North America, Australia, etc. And what a lot of these guys seem to be doing is they're accepting crypto and they're running gameplay on blockchain protocols. Are those two things inseparable? As in, can you separate the use of, let's just call it crypto for the sake of simplicity, right? So value tokens from games which are built using distributed ledger technology?
I'll give it a try. Basically, the short answer is no, you can't. I think the technology requires some form of a digital asset to be functional. Mostly that would be a token. We call those crypto assets or token or some cryptocurrencies. How the current gaming operators using blockchain technology, they mostly focus as cryptocurrencies as a mean of payment, as a mean of interaction, token of value to make the access to a gaming application possible. I think when we talk about blockchain technology, we should step back a little. And at the end of the day, it's just a technology, and technology is about solving problems. So we need to first ask the question, well, what kind of challenges do we have in the gaming space we could try to solve with a new type of technology? And that may bring an answer that blockchain could be an answer to some of those issues. So when we look at advantages of blockchain technology, we have a couple of features which are very interesting from a tech point of view. We have, for the first time in history, we can create unique digital assets, means of value which can be transferred peer-to-peer without any financial intermediary in between. And that's very unique. We didn't have that before. So based on this idea, we don't, if it is a challenge to create trust, if you don't want to be a financial intermediary, if you don't want to do the account keeping for consumers of users, we can implement blockchain technology to avoid that. Which doesn't mean that we need to use any of those funny tokens which come out of ICOs, but which means that we need to create a certain token of value, which gives you the access to the technology. So this is one issue we can solve there. And the other one, mainly, in short words, is automation. We can create code which can operate in a very transparent manner, autonomously, without someone controlling it, meaning without someone having the possibility to change the code and thus to change transactions and algorithms behind the transactions. So the blockchain technology gives trust to the user that the system really operates as is promised on the website. So those are challenges which can be solved through technology. But when we go back to Curacao, I think there is still in an early experimental stage trying to find solutions how to make use of crypto assets which currently exist.
So I completely agree with you. It's about how you can embrace technology to make a better product, to solve a problem using that technology. It's not a technology that you adopt for the sake of it. It doesn't make any business sense at all. And you spoke to the use of a unit of a digital asset, a token of value, used for methods of payment, of course. But there's a huge discussion revolving around the money laundering, the origin of those funds, the point of conversion into a digital asset, and I'd like the panelists to address that point, and I'd like you to speak to whether or not this technology can actually function so as to resolve the issue, the problem, which is the risk of money laundering. how do you prevent it using the technology? How do you run KYC using the technology?
Okay, let me just go back one step to the previous question, and then I'll cover the current one. I think the problems that blockchain and cryptocurrency are designed to overcome in gambling would be, firstly, transparency of the transactions, and secondly, payment obstacles. So the payment obstacles portion is something which is addressed by, firstly, avoiding the intervention of third-party payment services providers, avoiding the banking systems, and allowing the players and the casino to engage in the transactions on the blockchain in a completely anonymous manner, and using currency which is outside of the traditional banking system. So I think that's where AML comes in. And I think this is something that would pose the greatest challenge to regulators, because if you don't even know who are the people who are using cryptocurrency and engaging in the blockchain transactions, then how do you require the gaming operator to then do a KYC checks on the people who are actually facilitating the transfer of the monies? And I think here, perhaps I can share with you the experience in Singapore. Now, Singapore is a country which, as you may know, has got a first-rate financial system. We are a major financial hub in the world. We have embraced fintech, and we have actually welcomed the use of blockchain technology. But I think some scorn has been poured by financial institutions on the ICOs in particular. The leading banks in Singapore have labeled Bitcoin and ICOs as a big Ponzi scheme. And I think the CEO of JP Morgan Chase has also called Bitcoin a big fraud, and he's actually threatened to dismiss any employee who engages in Bitcoin trading. So that's the sort of mentality that we have seen. Now, the regulator in Singapore has come up to say that whoever deals with cryptocurrency will, for AML purposes, be dealt with in the same way as someone who is a money changer or a remittance agent. So the AML regulations that govern obligations of money changers and remittance agents will equally apply to people who deal with cryptocurrency. Now, it's not specifically for purposes of gambling. It could be for anything, as long as cryptocurrency is used as a form of payment. But Singapore has gone through various consultation stages with a view to passing a new law. It's called a Payment Systems Bill. And that is the law that will seek to license all intermediaries who are involved in either the buying, selling, or the exchange of cryptocurrency. So if I'm not sure whether you've actually seen an ATM machine that sells Bitcoins. You can actually go to that machine, you put in a $50 note, and then you provide your e-wallet details, and the Bitcoin value is transferred into your e-wallet. And
Koh Keng, I just want to interrupt you, and I apologize for interrupting you, but isn't it unfair to always go back to Bitcoin in the discussion about blockchain technology? Because if you look at the technology itself and its potential application, perhaps also to resolve the issue of origin of funds and knowing your customer, then you could perfectly conceive of, in fact, you can see a number of coins out there which were developed with that in mind. And I'd like you guys to sort of address that point. Maybe before coming to that, I just wanted to comment that what you were saying about Singapore actually seems quite similar to something Anna Maria was saying earlier this morning to us about Romania, which is that there is their financial regulator has said, look guys, we don't want you dealing in crypto. The banks are not to touch it. They're not to receive funds originating from there. Is that in fact the case, Anna Maria? And then can you go on, and can the other panelists also go on to address the point of using the technology to solve the problem?
So yes, I'm the diversity in the panel, and I'm probably the less tech person around the table. So I turn back to what I know, and what I know is that at least in Romania at this moment, the National Bank of Romania, which is the authority supervising the banking system in Romania, came 2 months ago, not 3 years, not 5 years, not 10 years ago, 3 months ago, and said, you banks are warned, and you should not touch anything that has anything to do with cryptocurrency. You are not allowed to, well, it's not that you are not allowed, but it's better if you don't have anything to do with persons dealing with crypto or with persons whose source of funds comes from cryptocurrency, which made the banks in Romania basically totally unappealed to anything that has to do with cryptocurrency, and which in my view will also probably delay the process of adopting this into gambling to forever, or close to forever. And also, as James mentioned, this is one, and the other one is that, at least for us in gambling, everything is about fiat money. If it's not fiat money, then it's not gambling. This leads us to another discussion, which we'll probably have.
That is quite peculiar, and it's just a side note. But I do find that quite peculiar that in Romania, if you're not playing fiat money, you're not gambling. So no matter whether the game is one of chance. But that's probably another discussion,
this,
an interesting discussion to have. But what about using the technology to solve the origin of funds point?
Maybe I'll jump in on that. It's interesting because this panel and these discussions take me back many, many years where conferences like this, I've been around internet gaming for almost 20 years, where conferences like this were 95% bricks and mortar gaming, and there was one internet gaming panel. And the nature of the discussion around internet gaming was you can't have internet gaming because of money laundering and people will use it for terrorism, and everyone dismissed it. And now let's fast forward 18 years and the United States now has sports betting, which no one thought would ever happen, and there's internet gaming in various states in the US. And when we go back, internet gaming started in Curacao and started in Antigua and started in Kanawaki, and it took time for regulators in other jurisdictions to realize that the challenges of regulating the industry could be met. And the same will happen with blockchain technology. You're right, James, to dismiss Bitcoin. Bitcoin is based on anonymity, but most of the tokens being issued today are no longer based on anonymity. There are respected third-party providers who can run KYC, AML, source of funds checks on electronic wallets as well, if not better, than you can run source of funds checks because money's coming out of your HSBC or Santander or whichever bank you're using with your fiat currency. So let's leave the myth aside. You can run KYC and AML and source of funds using technology on digital assets. The challenge for internet gaming in general, of adopting blockchain technology is an interesting one, because by using a decentralized database, by using smart contracts, you remove the risk of operator fraud. And so there are many benefits to a new, nascent, developing technology, which internet gaming companies will at some point have no choice but to use and develop, because blockchain technology over the coming years will become pretty standard, and people will be using blockchain throughout, and therefore will be wondering why they're gambling with an operator online who has total control of the database and total control of the random number generator, and there is no transparency. And therefore there's a big opportunity here. You know, the question is, one, for the operators to embrace the technology, and two, once they've embraced the technology, as the internet gaming companies did 10, 15 years ago, is then going and educating the regulators. Well, we've been through that, so we'll do it again.
Actually, I believe it almost works I couldn't agree more on everything you say, but at the end of the day, I think it works a bit the other way around, that when we look at how industrial applications of blockchain technology will look like, they don't look what we read like what we read in the newspapers today. It's not about this, you know, all this crazy hype about whatever kind of token. It's about the technology to be implemented in industrial use cases. And the first use cases we're currently seeing are in the financial industry. And the financial industry faces the same challenges as the gaming industry does. You need a full KYC AML check on your clients. There's no way around that in a organized form beyond, you know, some funny jurisdictions. It does, and when we look what is being developed now on the financial industry sector, what kind of financial infrastructures are being built on blockchain, that we have European stock exchanges which rebuild their entire infrastructure on blockchain technology to be with the aim to replace that for the old infrastructure to be able to deal with the digital assets of the future. Of course, there is a KYC and AML process implemented in there.
Andreas, if I can just barge in and sort of shift the discussion here to ask, I want to ask Joe, as a former regulator and now being advised and being involved in advising regulators, how does a regulator in the gambling industry, and of course this is open for discussion as well, but how does a regulator in the gambling industry get comfortable that a platform or a protocol which is DLT based does what the developers say it does, because of its public nature, does not come as a sort of double-edged sword where on the one hand, okay, there's the transparency element, but on the other hand, it might be subject to tampering. And how does a regulator get the reporting data, the regulatory reporting data it needs to fulfill its statutory duties? Also, what about the idea that a lot of countries in Europe still have today of having transactional data on their territory with the Spanish, Danish, French vault type system, which I mean, we can discuss the merits of that another day, but there is this concern which seems outdated, yet it's there. How do you get a regulator from where they are today? And frankly, I don't think I know any regulators worldwide that are really prepared to start accepting blockchain-based gambling, at least not in tier 1 jurisdictions, to a position where they can feel comfortable that they tick all of the requirements that they are required by law to satisfy.
I'd like to start by answering two questions ago, basically, but tied to this. Why are all the gaming operators working with blockchain technology in Curaçao or in some other Caribbean jurisdiction? The truth is that it's impossible today to come to Europe or to the United States and operate with blockchain. Maybe there's a possibility in the UK currently, because the way the law is structured allows for quite a lot of technology neutrality in terms of the business models. But still, it is very, very difficult to actually fit within the regulatory frameworks that exist. The problem, obviously, we have also Malta, which has been working on a set of guidelines for almost 12 months now, and they haven't yet issued the final version, although I'm pretty sure that it will be out very soon. But again, if you look at those guidelines, you'll notice that there are a lot of situations where the regulator is fearful. So basically, instead of implementing a proper KYC and AML procedure, they are limiting, their intention, at least from the consultation paper, was to limit the amount each and every player can actually play each and every user can actually play via cryptocurrencies, for example. So rather than trying to find a solution within the technology, we're going for limits. So basically, the first step is, as I believe Gil mentioned, is for operators to educate the authorities and explain to them the advantages, not just for the operator. There are some advantages for the operator, but at the same time, there are many advantages for the user and also for the regulator, because so all the information will be actually visible. So reporting requirements are practically unnecessary, although you can always send a data feed of that information to the regulator if the regulator wishes. Even replication, if needs be, you can always send a copy of the data on a server located in that jurisdiction.
But is it possible from a regulatory point of view to enforce that data feed is actually unbiased and that the data is whole, not tampered with? Because that was the whole idea of those vault systems. Which
although everyone seems to be very critical about Bitcoin and Ethereum, the nature of how Bitcoin and Ethereum platforms were set up is crucial for this, because you cannot show something that is not on Ethereum. You can't show something that is not on Bitcoin. In the Bitcoin blockchain, whatever happens is recorded there and is visible for everyone. I'm more concerned of these private blockchains that governments seem to ironically prefer, because they have someone who is responsible for them, and governments are a bit, they love to have someone who is responsible, unlike Bitcoin and Ethereum where no one is responsible. And actually, the advantage of Bitcoin and Ethereum, the way they are structured, is actually that no one can tamper with it.
Do the other panelists share this concern? Do you think that the regulator ought to prefer a public chain?
Well, for me, not necessarily. I think the public chain certainly has some advantages with regard to you have a big community controlling this chain, thus you can't change the content. If you have a centralized chain, this may change. However, you have a lot of semi-private chains idea, so you have a couple of nodes, couple of entities who jointly control it. That could be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And for most use cases, this would be sufficient. You don't need 1,000 nodes to operate a blockchain. So I believe many use cases will most likely not be operated in a fully decentralized open chain, but rather on a semi-private chain.
Gil, any thoughts on that?
I think with respect, it's almost not relevant. I think that at the end of the day, the level of sophistication of regulators is such that they will never be able to scratch the surface on this. The same is true of internet gaming.
Isn't that like telling them don't touch it?
No, it's almost the opposite, because I remember sitting in Malta, probably 15 years ago, opposite the then regulator, who had on his desk something that looks like the Starship Enterprise, with a whole bunch of screens and cables, and it was super impressive. And I said, "What is that for?" He said, "Every transaction goes across my desk." I said, "What do you mean every transaction goes across your desk?" He said, No, every single transaction goes across my desk." I said, "And why do you need that?" He said, "Because then I can switch it off." When has the Maltese or any other regulator watched transactions move across their desk and switch them off? The technology, even today, without blockchain, is so super complicated that regulators have to regulate individuals and have to regulate companies and have to have some faith in their ability, because they cannot go under the hood of almost any internet gaming operator and really understand what's going on. They can use BMM and other testing labs to make sure the results coming out are right and are authentic, and the same will be true of blockchain. at the end of the day, it will become an accepted form of technology. If it's a public chain, if it's a private chain, is just a level of understanding that a gaming regulator will never be able to get to. So they're going to have to buy into the concept, I think, rather than being able to think that they're going to take a screwdriver and start taking this apart.
Can we jump back to the publicity element once again? And I think this is the last point we'll be able to address, and then we'll take questions from the floor because of the time limitation we have. Isn't there a huge tension between the publicity element, which is inherent in a public chain, and the GDPR? Can they coexist? Perhaps Andreas and Gil have comment, but also perhaps Anna Maria and Kok Keng, please, if you have some input on this. The inherent tension between the General Data Protection Regulation, which is of course a European instrument, but which has worldwide ramifications, and the very nature of a public blockchain.
Well, I think the very nature of blockchain is that there's anonymity. So you don't know who is engaging in the transactions. The parties are all described by alphanumeric characters, and the data privacy is protected to a very large extent. Of course, the anonymity can be breached if the ISP were to trace the individual packets of information that's sent across, and if the VPN service is not being used, then you can actually trace the location of the parties who are involved in the transaction. But to a very large extent, this is just not practical, and for all intents and purposes, blockchain does ensure anonymity, and that's perfectly consistent with data protection requirements. But then again, you see, for data protection laws, it's always subject to national security exceptions, to exceptions that allow you to uncover money laundering activities that are going on, criminal activities. So I don't see how data protection requirements can be said to be absolute, and that it's inconsistent with anonymity, with the blockchain nature.
Do other panelists concur? Anna Maria, Joe, we could.
I'd like to pass a comment on this. Anonymity is there until the operator allows it, of course. So if the operator requires you to register, it's no anonymity. So the fear that, look, because Bitcoin is anonymous, or even if you're using an exchange, if you need to actually make use of an exchange and the exchange requires you to pass through KYC and AML checks, I cannot understand the concern about anonymity on this. If it is a platform that is owned by no one and it's purely decentralized platform that is probably either operating with a Curaçao or no license whatsoever, because there's no point in getting a license actually, that's one story. But ultimately you can have an operator using a public blockchain that requires his clients to pass through KYC and AML. So I don't see why this fear. It is true that the philosophy behind blockchain is anonymity. And I understand that the whole point is specifically, the whole point why Bitcoin was created was to destroy the current financial system. But it doesn't mean that we have to think in this maximalist way.
But if you register and there's no anonymity, doesn't that bring us back to the point I made about GDPR?
Well, I think definitely there's quite a tension between GDPR and blockchain technology, and the question at the end of the day is what data do you store on blockchain, what do you store off-chain, and how you build the interfaces. So it's essentially the same question we always have, how can you guarantee data privacy by design? So where do you keep the data, how do those off-chain databases interact with the on-chain database, and you need to check that you don't have any personal data on-chain. I think that's the solution.
And because I'm the lawyer, not the tech person, I'm going to ask somebody who's more competent than me in this area, how do you implement the right to be forgotten? on a blockchain where you cannot change anything and you cannot delete anything?
By not storing data on chain, so you don't have the data somewhere where you can't delete it. That would be the technical solution.
Personal data wouldn't be on the chain. The transaction data will be on the chain, but it will be linked to an off-chain database, centralized, that will hold the personal data. That's the only solution at this stage.
Which also makes a lot of sense because you can't store an awful lot of data on chain because the chain is simply too slow for that.
I think that, I mean, there would be follow-up questions to that again on how do you get a regulator to be comfortable with the off-chain element, etc. But let me open the floor to, let me open questions to the floor. Are there any questions at this stage? Raise your hands if you have a question. Yes, sir. Could you state your name, please?
You said there were some advantages or benefits to regulators. What are they?
Okay, so having been a regulator, one of our biggest fears, and literally it used to terrorize us every single day of our lives, was that operators held millions in player funds. With blockchain technology and smart contracts, this could be a thing of the past. Operators do not need to hold player funds. Literally, the moment you start the transaction, you want to play 10 euros on this slot game, you just send into the smart contract those 10 euros, and once you win, you will get those 10 euros plus the winnings. Once you lose, those 10 euros will go to the operator. If it's a P2P, because blockchain brings most advantages to P2P gaming more than B2C gaming, so player to player and pool games. In that case, the money does not even touch the operator. It will remain the smart contract. The winnings will go to the winners, and only the commission part will go to the operator. Added to that, if the regulators start accepting payment of taxes in crypto, tax could be paid immediately. Today, regulators depend totally, through the smart contract itself, by the way. Today, regulators depend totally on certificates by, I saw that BMM is a sponsor here, GLI, and all these labs, which we all have really good faith on because we feel that they have proved their worth throughout these years, and they are serious companies. There are some labs that are maybe not so serious, but we still rely on their certificates.
Joe, could you conclude, please? 'Cause the co-chair has already admonished me that now we are running slightly.
The nice thing about blockchain is that you can actually prove the fairness of the game through the transactions, because you're actually seeing that they are really paying out, for example, 95%, because you can calculate it. It's visible to everyone, and it's immutable. It cannot be changed by anyone. So these are just some of the advantages.
So any final 10-second comments from any of the panelists?
I think the challenge for all of us in the room is to understand the technology moving forward. I think there are still many people, as I have discussions with lawyers all over the world on blockchain and crypto, who still see there's something in the corner which is to be avoided. And I think the challenge for advisors to gaming companies, as every gaming company I'm advising is having discussions around how they should be looking at. Some of them are deciding it's some years away. But in order to properly advise our clients, I think this is an area that people need to at least have an understanding of.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. Would you please put your hands together for our panelists?